The Kentucky Derby season is heating up. Let's talk about it on this episode of the Win Play Show. Salutations and welcome, friends. I'm your host of this episode of the Win Play Show. My name is Matthew DeSantis, and you can find me on Twitter at the handle at Failed to Menace. Well, thank you so much for joining this episode of the Win Play Show as we cover the biggest topics in horse racing. And of course, at the top of that list right now is all of the Kentucky Derby prep races and where we stand just about a month out from the big Saturday in May. But before we get to that, just a quick reminder, press that subscribe button here on Trust the Prophecy. If you have not done that already, this is going to be your one-stop shop place for all horse racing news that you need to get you through the Kentucky Derby, the Preakness, the Belmont, and well beyond that. We have obviously Kentucky Derby and Kentucky Oaks prep news. We're going to continue to do graded stakes previews, capping the card, doubling down, live betting Thursday nights, all sorts of great content that we have here for you on Trust the Prophet. So make sure to press that subscribe button. Make sure to follow me on Twitter at the handle at Failed to Menace. Make sure to like this video and comment below with what your biggest takeaway was from this past weekend in racing. Now, before we dive into what we saw on the track, I just want to say a huge thank you to everyone who came out to Gulfstream Park and said hello to me while I was down there with fellow Trust the Prophet, El Hombre. The two of us got down to Gulfstream Park. We're there Friday and Saturday, and I cannot thank all of you who came up to me enough. It was so humbling, truly, to have so many wonderful people come up and say how much they enjoy the program, that they watch, that they, take advice from us. And it really is not lost on me how humbling it is and how lucky I am, quite frankly, to be able to interact with all of you and to have so many people who have the similar passion as I do about horse racing. It's a wonderful community. So many thanks to all of you who came up to me. I even got a hug from a fan. She was a lovely woman who actually brought her daughter to the track as well. And I got a hug after the race because things turned out well for the two of us in the Florida Derby. So it was a really fun time. And also want to say a big thank you to Angela Herman and Brian Nadeau from down there at Gulfstream Park. Both of them could not have been nicer and showed great hospitality the whole time. Wonderful time. Love doing it. And all the folks I met down there just could not have been nicer at Gulfstream Park. So I had a great experience down there this past weekend. You'll notice that my pigmentation, slightly different shade than it was last week. Even though I lived in Florida for 7 years, I forgot that it gets pretty hot. You should wear a lot more sunscreen than you were expecting. And just because you're Italian does not mean you are immune from that. So it got a little too much sun, particularly on the schnoz, because I have a larger than average nose. So it sticks out. Even when I wear my cap, it does not provide enough shade. The geography or the geometry does not work out for me there. So in all seriousness, though, wonderful weekend. Cannot thank all of you enough. Just got back from 20 hours of driving. Wanted to record this, though, to talk to all of you about a really big weekend. So let's start with the top. Let's start with the Florida Derby, and let's start with what we saw at Gulfstream Park on Saturday. And that was the victory of Forte over Mage, over Cyclone Mischief in the Florida Derby. This was a really intriguing race. And it was a race that I loved being on the track for because there was a lot of buzz. Everybody I went up and talked to, almost everybody, I shouldn't say everybody, almost everybody I went up and talked to, I'm going to try to beat Forte. I'm going to try to beat Forte. I'm going to try to beat Forte. Oh, the 11 post. And you heard so on and so forth. And they almost pulled it off because Forte breaking from that 11 post did not get a particularly good trip. Irad Ortiz Jr. as jockey said afterwards, I thought I was going to be able to get to the lead. That interested me a little bit that he said that. He thought he was going to be pretty forward in this race. And that surprised me. And I tell you that because on paper, I felt like there was a lot of speed in this race and a lot of horses that wanted to be very forwardly placed. And that was really their only angle, was to be forwardly placed. Whereas Forte had a lot more versatility. And I thought for sure plan A was going to be let them go. We'll take back, tuck inside. And Irad apparently tried to go and be aggressive, realized that wasn't going to work, and then moved to plan B, which was to take back, tuck inside. As a result, though, Forte and Mage were both towards the back of the field and getting a lot of dirt, obviously, and giving up a lot of lengths. Mage makes the first move, starts to make his move before Forte makes his. They come sweeping around the outside, going around the third and fourth turns, and then coming into the home stretch, Mage tracks down Cyclone Mischief, who was starting to get, I thought, a pretty brave on the lead, actually, looked really good. And there comes Forte, and the class just wins out. That was a perfect example of just Forte is a better horse at this point in his career than Mage is. Mage was running in his third career race. Forte has been through the battles. I've talked about this repeatedly. As much as I love young ascending horses, what I also love are horses that have been in the battles before. The horses that have faced adversity, have looked eye to eye with another horse and say, you're not getting past me, or I am going to get past you. And that's exactly what Forte did, going all the way back to the Breeders' Cup Futurity with he and Loggins, where that was a great stretch duel. And Forte said, I'm winning this thing. When he blew by Cave Rock in the Breeders' Cup juveniles, that was another example. And this was just Forte's class just winning out. And I knew that Forte had it when I just saw Irad showing him the crop, just showing him the crop. Keep going, keep going, keep going. And he stayed straight and he just kept going. And he ended up winning by a little over a length in the end over Mage, who I thought ran a huge race for Mage. I thought Cyclone Mischief ran a huge race. I thought those three absolutely gave you their best efforts. And somewhat proud to say that when we did the very first look preview, now, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to pick Forte first, but Colin's top value pick was Mage. My top value pick was Cyclone Mischief. So we gave you the trifecta. Hopefully you played it or some variation of it, because it actually paid off halfway decent, especially the trifecta, because Cyclone Mischief, I think, was the fourth choice on the board at 13-1. So, like I said, that should have paid a little bit. But as much as everybody talked about trying to beat Forte, there was a whole lot of money coming in on Forte to win that race. But overcoming post 11, overcoming a tough trip. And then the drama started afterwards, and the next day, even in particular, because the race had been mistimed. Forte initially is awarded a 98 Beyer speed figure, but whoopsie daisy, it turns out Gulfstream Park mistimed the race, and that the race actually came back about almost 9/10 of a second slower than it's almost a full second slower than it really was. So his Beyer got reduced from a 98 to a 95 as a result of that. So where does this leave us as it relates to the Florida Derby? Well, I think a lot of people will say, listen, it showed Forte can dig in and can, give off a very impressive effort. It also shows that Forte is very beatable. But I think that's something that I thought before. I thought Forte was the best horse in this crop, but I never thought Forte was invincible. There was a big difference between being ranked number one and being just, no doubt about it. I thought people who were putting 3-1 on him in a Kentucky Derby's future seemed a little, I thought that was a little trigger happy, but it really does leave us in a spot where that was a solid effort from Forte, but it also makes you realize, depending on what post he's in, depending on what type of trip he gets, maybe he's vulnerable there. Now, I see some people who would take the opposite approach and go, this is the worst possible situation that could have happened to him in terms of bad post position, didn't get the trip he wanted, took a lot of kickback, faced a tough competition in terms of Mage, who really made him work for it, and he still ended up winning. And this, if he was going to turn in a clunker, this might have been the clunker. And now he's going to be sitting on a big race for the Kentucky Derby. Maybe so. But I think we realize post position matters. And as much as we want to put credence into all these Kentucky Derby preps, and we should, ultimately, when they start drawing the fields, the week of the Kentucky Derby, whole lot of futures change depending on who gets the 1 hole, who gets the 20 hole, and that sort of stuff. So, we can talk until we're blue in the face about how these horses look, but a lot of it is going to be trip and pace dependent. And, I think it was a very good effort from Forte. But again, I think it also, if you're looking to try to find value in the Kentucky Derby, you absolutely can find it, because I think there's plenty of reasons to suspect Forte, he is beatable in that race. As impressive as he's been, he's still beatable He's mortal. This is not American Pharaoh. This is not Justified. This is, this is a horse. I know Colin Sheehan compares him a little bit to Essential Quality. I think that's probably a pretty apt comparison. A very good horse, but not an elite horse necessarily, or not an unbeatable horse. So I think that's where we're having some disagreements among different groups of people who watch that race. But there was more than just the Florida Derby on Saturday at Gulfstream Park, and there was the Gulfstream Park Oaks. And folks, as wide open as the Derby feels, and we're going to talk a little bit more about another Derby prep at Oaklawn Park here in a little bit, as wide open as the Derby feels, the Oaks just feels completely wide open. And maybe this coming weekend will provide a little bit more structure, but the Gulfstream Park Oaks did nothing to provide more structure to it this weekend, as Affirmative Lady at double-digit odds for Graham Motion, always root for Graham, always like him a lot as a trainer, ends up winning and upsetting the Gulfstream Park Oaks. And here's the thing, the top three choices, Darth Vader, Atomically, and Miracle, those three horses did not show up at all. They did not run well. Miracle, who ran a really game second, I thought, at the Rachel Alexandra, comes back and doesn't break particularly well, doesn't get on the lead. And now it looks like that's a horse that probably needs the lead, doesn't get it, kind of packs it in. Atomically, it just flat out is not the same horse she was late last year. She's just not turned in anywhere near the sort of effort I think a lot of us have expected her to take a step forward with. And then Darth Vader proved that Devonadale was largely a pace-dependent sort of victory, where they went incredibly fast up front. She sat back and then slingshotted by everybody. And she didn't get that sort of trip this time. And guess what? She didn't finish the way she did last time. So those three favorites were completely out of the equation. And Affirmative Lady just ran a heck of a race. This is a horse that just broke her maiden last time out, despite the fact that she actually finished second in the Demoiselle, third in the Busanda up in New York late last year. This is a horse that might be peaking at the right time for Graham Motion. Always like to see Graham get some of these horses in. Daughter of Arrogate, we always love to see that. I've talked about that before on some of the Oaks countdowns. Love to see those Arrogate progeny. There's a limited number of them, and so it's very special to see them when they do well. So congrats to Affirmative Lady, who I thought ran a great race, but that again upends the apple cart a little bit and just provides a little bit less structure and clarity in that Kentucky Oaks picture, which I also think is shaping up to be a fantastic betting race, that if you have a hunch on a horse, you're going to be able to get a pretty good price on that horse. Well, let's talk about some of the other races at Gulfstream Park on Saturday. And one of the races that I was really intrigued by was the Orchid Stakes. And if you follow me on Twitter at the handle at Failed to Menace, I didn't tweet out much, but I did mention over the weekend. It was a crazy weekend. A lot of it was just a lot of travel and driving and getting logistics and getting there. So I didn't get a chance to tweet out too much. But one of the things I did tweet out was that I thought Amazing Grace, the horse for Christophe Clement, was kind of the safest bet of the whole weekend. And indeed, she ran like it in that Orchid Stakes. She's really special. She ran against the boys last time out in Europe and actually finished third to a little horse I like to call Rebels Romance, who, oh, by the way, only won the Breeders' Cup Turf. So she was running against a much, much better caliber of competition over there. She was on, Joel Rosario was on her on Saturday. Honestly, he got her in a ton of trouble. It was not the easiest trip, but when she kicked for home, very impressive. And Rosario wove through traffic beautifully in the home stretch. Actually took kind of an inside path that you typically don't see as a winning move in the turf at Gulfstream Park, but managed to pull it off. Very, very impressive. She was so much the best over a horse personal best, who's a very nice filly as well. But Amazing Grace, wow, what an effort there from her. She's, I think, going to be a real star. I'm excited to see where she goes next, presumably up to Saratoga this summer. That should be a lot of fun to see how she continues to run here in North America. But I think Christophe Clement's got a very good one there. And here's the interesting thing. We talk a lot about how Joel Rosario has struggled this year. This is an amazing statistic, and it's something that I've noted before on Capping the Card and a couple of other shows that I do. But as of today, 64% of Joel Rosario's wins at Gulfstream Park this championship meet have come on Christophe Clement horses. Rosario's winning at a 10% clip for the meet, but 64% of those wins have come when riding Clement horses. And he's winning at a 31% clip when he's working with Clement. That should tell you something. I think that's an interesting angle because I know a lot of people are fading Rosario. I fade him in a lot of cases because he's in a little bit of a cold stretch. But when he's on a Clement horse, I never fade him. That he just seems to, maybe it's just Christoph's got better stock, quite frankly, and maybe placing horses in better spots. But that does seem to be still a very winning connection. Well, let's talk about the final race that I'll touch on from Saturday at Gulfstream Park. And that is, of course, the Ghost Zapper Stakes. And I have to bring this up because everybody knows that my favorite horse is Simplification, who did not run particularly well in this Ghost Zapper. And I wasn't expecting a great effort from Simplification. I always root for Simplification. I love that horse so very much. It's kind of an irrational love that I have for him, but he needs a break. And I just really hope that the owner and trainer take some time to consider what's going to be best for this horse, because it's obvious he's tired and he needs a break. And I don't like him going 2 turns. I thought last time out actually made a lot of sense in the Gulfstream Park Mile to run him in a 1-turn mile race. I think that's actually where he's best. And they come back to run him over 2 turns. He doesn't have it anymore. He doesn't have that burst. He doesn't have that ability. And it just was not a very good effort there. And like I said, hope to see the horse get a 3-4 month layoff, come back maybe, in the fall sometime and start racing again. But it just feels like it's just too bad. And because I really do like that horse a lot, but just isn't going to turn in very good efforts, I think, from this point forward, if they continue to race him on this kind of monthly schedule. Now, that said, I don't want to bury the lead. Clapton ran the race of his life. And I'll be honest, there's been a lot of that lately in horse racing. Seems like a lot of horses are running the races of their lives. And you can read into that whatever you'd like. But Clapton ran a heck of a race and managed to beat O'Connor, who, for Saffie Joseph Jr., O'Connor looked like just lights out in the paddock. I mean, I don't do paddock picks very often. I mean, I'm pretty good at looking at horses and physically handicapping. I'm nowhere near, someone like my friend Sarah El Badwi. I'm nowhere near some of these other people who do it professionally. Jess Paquette, much better at that sort of thing. But I'm halfway decent. I can spot when a horse is a little too keyed up, or what certain physical characteristics I like to see on certain types of horses. But O'Connor, I mean, just popped through this. You didn't have to know much about physical handicapping to know that O'Connor looked so good in the paddock. And I thought, man, he's going to run a huge race. And he ran a much better effort than he did last time out in the Harlan's Holiday. So O'Connor is a horse I like a lot for Saffie. I'll be interested in where they go with O'Connor after this championship meet. Presumably he's going up to that New York. That's where Saffie would presumably take him. But it'll be interesting to see what sort of races O'Connor gets into, because he's a horse with a lot of ability, and I think he's still figuring out racing here in North America. This is only his 3rd career race in North America, so I'll be interested to see how he continues to develop. And then the other horse that I just don't know where the future lies with this horse is First Captain, who finished dead last, and I just don't know where the future lies for that horse, because that's now 2 consecutive poor efforts, and we'll see what happens next time out with First Captain, or where and when First Captain might run again. Well, let's shift away from Gulfstream Park and to the Midwest, to Oaklawn Park, which, lo and behold, had a sunny, lovely day on Saturday. And that was unfortunately after some very bad storms that really ripped through the area on Friday, and certainly sending out all of my thoughts and prayers to my friends and fans and any of you who are out there listening who are in the Arkansas region who were affected by those storms. Really, really tough stuff. And there's obviously, I'll include a link to some donation opportunities for people who want to give back to that region through the Red Cross, etc. So that is, sometimes horse racing is a respite from real life. And that was certainly the case, I think, on Saturday at Oaklawn Park. But it was still great to see 65,000 people turned out at Oaklawn Park. Saw some of my friends tweeting that information out, and that was great to see. One of my former students, actually, Aiden Green, who's married to the trainer Ike Green, And so she said, you wonder why I never bring my kids. This is why. There's too many people. But it was awesome to see that many people at Oaklawn on Saturday. But let's talk about the Arkansas Derby, which was won by a horse that I should actually like a lot more than I typically do, which is Angel of Empire. Why should I like this horse a lot? It's a Pennsylvania bred. That's my home state, and always root for those PA bred horses. And this, I'll be honest, 4 months ago, we talked a lot about Bob Baffert's horses. We talked a lot about Brad Cox's horses. And it's fascinating to me that as we get closer to the Kentucky Derby, there really aren't many Bob Baffert horses that we're talking about. And it is possible that Angel of Empire is the best Brad Cox horse. And he was kind of an afterthought in a lot of ways. And, prior to that last effort in the Risen Star. So I think Angel Empire ran a huge race, got the pace to run into. It is a little bit of still a pace dependent horse, I think, but got a nice pace set up, 23-3 opening quarter, 47-3 opening half. They did slow down to about a 112-3 opening three quarters, earned a 94 buyer speed figure. So kind of right on par with her where Forte was in the Florida Derby. And, easily put away the rest of the competition and opened up multiple lengths over horses like King Russell, over Reincarnate, over Rocket Can, over Airtime. I mean, really second through sixth, kind of throw a blanket over the five of them because they all finished around the same spot. So there wasn't a huge differentiation, I didn't feel like, between Rocket Can and Reincarnate and King Russell and Airtime and horses like that. They all kind of finished in a group several lengths behind Angel Empire. But, that's a horse I feel like has not gotten a lot of respect. Feels a little bit maybe like a Rodney Dangerfield horse. I get no respect, I tell you. And so it is going to be fascinating to see, because I still don't know if a lot of people have faith in Angel Empire. Angel Empire hasn't necessarily popped with a big speed figure. I think it's fair to go, how good is the rest of the field necessarily? I mean, Rocket Can, I think that's kind of the type of horse Rocket Can is probably. He's around a 90 or so buyer speed figure type of horse. Reincarnate not taking a step forward after that last troubled trip, I thought was a little disappointing, obviously. But you look at the rest of that field, okay, Airtime's okay, King Russell's fine. There wasn't necessarily a ton else in that field. And I think the bloom is off the rose a little bit with Red Route 1. And that's a horse that I started getting a little bit more concerned with. I liked early on in the Derby season, started to get a little bit more concerned. That running style, just he leaves so much to do. The blinkers going on theoretically should have helped. It just, the horse didn't make up the sort of ground coming down the stretch. And again, just felt like, maybe that horse really likes the slop a little bit. You now have dry, fast conditions, a little bit of a different scenario. So it's going to be interesting. I think, with regards to the Florida Derby, I talked about post position mattering. Forte is still vulnerable to a bad post position. It's not as if he's some super horse that can overcome anything. He showed, yes, he can win, but it might get close and get it in a better field and in a larger field of 20 plus 20 horses with more top end talent. It might be tough for him to do that. I think with Angel of Empire, you look at how's the pace going to continue to set up, and what sort of pace is Angel of Empire going to get? Because that's, I think, a big question mark for all these horses that are kind of deep closers, is what sort of pace setup are you going to get? And Angel of Empire got the right setup and put on a beautiful move. It was a great ride by Flavien Prat, who did that kind of traditional middle move a little bit around the far turn that they always talk about at Oaklawn, and really ended up pulling away coming down the home stretch. So very good effort there. No doubt about it, effort from Angel of Empire. Now in the fantasy, it's funny. This was a little bit of the opposite of the Gulfstream Park Oaks. In the fantasy, we saw some order restored to the Kentucky Oaks picture in that wet paint. I think a favorite that a lot of us were trying to look past, because her only efforts have been on sloppy dirt, synthetic, and turf. She's never run on a dry, fast track. There were some questions there. What sort of pace would she get necessarily? Would she like the running conditions? Would she like the track like this? Well, she answered all those questions and more. She pulled away much the same way Angel of Empire did. She got the fast fractions, no doubt about it. 22-4 opening quarter, 47 flat opening half. They were moving up front, No two ways about it. Condensation, Olivia Twist, a lot of horses were kind of up there on the lead, pushing an aggressive pace. But still, ultimately, Wet Paint circles the whole field, goes super wide, comes for home, wins easily, and sweeps the Gulfstream Park Oaks Filly meet. Wins all three Oaks Preps races at Oaklawn Park, and really is the only filly to do that in any of the circuits. There's not been a filly to do that, obviously, down at Gulfstream Park. We haven't seen a filly do that up in New York, mainly because of Colt, who's, I think, a very good horse that's going to be running in the Gazelle this weekend, actually skipped the last Kentucky Oaks Prep race there. And then out west, you've had a situation, as we've talked about before, with Feza and Tell Me No Lies. Bob Baffert trained horse with Feza, who's not accumulating Oaks points because she's not eligible to run in the race because she's still trained by Bob Baffert. So it's one of those things where we've not seen a horse, a filly in this case, win every one of the Oaks Preps in the circuit that they're in. Obviously, we saw that also down with Pretty Mischievous just last weekend, losing to South Lawn Park in the Fairgrounds Oaks. So again, this is all to say Wet Paint only turns in an 89 Beyer speed figure, nothing that's going to jump off the page, but she does assert herself, I feel like, in the upper echelon of these Oaks crops. Now, we still have some really big Oaks Prep races coming up this coming weekend, Friday in particular, at Keeneland and the Ashland. But there's going to be a lot of big races coming up, and it's going to be a lot of fun to see how that Oaks picture continues to play out. But very dominant effort there from Wet Paint, and definitely answered a lot of questions in terms of surface. Still maybe not fast enough to really be considered an overwhelming favorite, but you can't argue with what she's produced to this point. And she's absolutely done the trick at Oaklawn Park. Well, let's talk a little bit about some upcoming horse racing news. And I mentioned we have a lot of Derby preps. We obviously have the Wood Memorial, the Bluegrass, and the Santa Anita, the last three really big prep races. We do have the Lexington and a few weeks after that at Keeneland. That's only a 20-point prep. These are the last three 100-point prep races, the Wood up at Aqueduct, Bluegrass at Keeneland, and the Santa Anita Derby, obviously out at the Great Race Place out at Santa Anita. In the Wood, you're going to be looking at Hit Show as the overwhelming favorite in that particular race, followed probably by Slit Mahoney, Arctic Arrogance, and Crouppy, all horses that I think have some shot depending on how the pace sets up in that particular race. In the Bluegrass, I actually don't think the Bluegrass has come up that strong. It's interesting. Verifying, Tappet Trice, Shadow Dragon, Blazing Sevens, Raise King, Classic Car Wash, an okay group, but I think that's an effort where I would expect a big effort out of Verifying in that race. Tappet Trice has a lot of questions to ask. How's that horse going to break after breaking so poorly at that Tampa Bay Derby? Can he get his gait issues cleaned up? I think that's a really big question. Blazing Seven showed absolutely nothing in that Fountain of Youth effort. Will he come back in stronger form? Chad Brown, really did insinuate that the Fountain of Youth was purely just a leg stretcher for him. So will he come back better? We'll see. I mean, I've never been a huge Blazing Sevens fan, so that Fountain of Youth maybe validated some things in my head that I already assumed. We'll see if he can come back better. Second from a long way off, you'd expect some improvement. Raise Cane, I think, is a nice horse, but benefited from just a massive pace meltdown and just a bizarre race in the Withers with a lone horse, with a riderless horse up on the lead. And so that was just kind of a bizarre scenario. Classic Car Wash is a nice horse, but just feels like an underneath horse. Shadow Dragon, the fact that Rocket Can turned in the performance he did at the Arkansas Derby doesn't give me a ton of confidence in Shadow Dragon. So we'll see. That race isn't coming up maybe as live as we thought it might a couple weeks ago. And then out west, I'll be honest, I think the best race this coming weekend is probably the Santa Anita Derby. Practical Move, who I am a really big fan of, I think is, the original Yak Teen horse, not one of these Baffert transfers, but a local Yak Teen horse. Like that horse a lot. Love the Richard Mandela horse, Go Rocket Ride in that particular race. Skinner, another very talented horse for John Sheriffs. National Treasure is actually back and going to be running in that race. He's a horse I really like, although I'm a little concerned just because he did have a little bit of an injury, is now coming back from that. So we'll see how he performs in that race. super talented horse. I think the longer it goes, the longer the race is, the better it is for National Treasure. Practical Move, though, is a very, very, very good horse out there. And then the crazy part is you might have a few Baffert entries out of that Santa Anita Derby. Cave Rock, Hijazi. These are horses that might just run in the Santa Anita Derby. No, they can't get any points, but they can really impact the way the race shapes up. And obviously the way points are distributed, because if they get first or second or even third, they're depriving potential points from other horses running in the race. And as a result, those horses won't be able to get to the Kentucky Derby potentially. So they could still have a huge impact on who ends up making the starting gate of the Kentucky Derby, even if they are not the ones who are able to do it. Now, on the Oaks side of things, we still have the Gazelle coming up at Aqueduct, the Ashland in Keeneland, and then the Santa Anita Oaks. The Gazelle, really, that looks like a Chad Brown race between, I think, his two best fillies, Occult and Sheeta Booty. I think those two are heads and shoulders kind of above the rest of that field. I think that kind of begins and ends with the two of them. The Ashland, I think, is an absolute banger of an Oaks race. That's the one I'm going to be keeping an eye on. Wonder Wheel, Julia Shining, and Punch Bowl. Punch Bowl is a super, super talented Brad Cox horse a filly who I think has only run 2 career races, but she's the real deal. She, I think, could be really, really talented. I'll be interested to see how she runs on Friday. Remember, that one's on Friday at the Ashland. Julia Shining, of course, they have to Malathaat. The longer it goes, the better it's going to be for her. Wonder Wheel, the Breeders' Cup juvenile filly champion. So I have to have a ton of respect for her. That should be a good one. Out at Santa Anita, this I would argue is the weakest potentially of the 3 Oaks races, with Feza, the Bob Baffert trained horse, and Tell Me No Lies, which is a Peter Miller trained horse. Arrogate as well. We just saw Affirmative Lady, the Arrogate filly, win. Can And Tell Me No Lies become another Arrogate filly to win that particular race? We will wait and see. In non-Derby and Oaks prep races, we do have a nice race, I think, coming up this weekend in the Carter up at Aqueduct between White Barrio, who's shipping north already, and Repo Rocks, the horse that I've talked about a few times on here, who Jamie Ness has taken over. And that horse appears to just suddenly be a world beater. And it'll be interesting to see, now that there's a little bit more spotlight on this horse, whether or not Repo Rocks continues to run this incredible form that he has put up the last several times out, which is pretty remarkable turnaround that he's had. And suddenly now he's running in big time, one turn stakes races, and will probably be either the favorite or second choice behind White Barrio, who will be making that trip out of Gulfstream Park, which I know a lot of people will fade White Barrio the second he gets out of Gulfstream Park, because they just believe he is a South Florida horse and they don't really like him anywhere else. We'll see. I mean, Safi's had more success up in New York, New Jersey, Pennsylvania over the last couple of years, so he can win outside of South Florida. But it's admittedly a concern with White Barrio that he really does love that South Florida track. So we'll see. Now, there is some other news in horse racing, and that is some really good news as it comes to Turfway Park. And always have to say thank you to Caitlin Free, who comes on regularly and gives us a lowdown on everything going on with the graded stakes races at Turfway Park. But they announced on Monday that they've increased their handle 62% from 1 year ago. So all source handle went up to $145 million during this last meet. Like I said, a 62% increase from a year ago. They did increase their purse money about 43%. So they are doing a fantastic job at Turfway Park. Let's keep it up. And I'll be honest, looking ahead, there's 2 horses I really like coming out of the Derby Preps and Oaks Preps at Turfway Park. And that is 2 fills, who I feel like may continue to fly under the radar. I'm a big fan of 2 fills. Really, really, really like that horse a lot. I think he's a very talented one who's a very honest runner. I'm a big fan of his. I think we could get a price on 2 fills when it comes to Derby Day. So I'm excited about him. And then on the Oak side, Botanical really is one of the more impressive fillies, I think, in this 3-year-old crop. Now, the question with her is, can she do it on dirt? She's done it on the synthetic, but she's never run on dirt before. That is absolutely a question, but you can't argue with her record at Turfway Park. Perfect 4 for 4, and she just been putting away competition and running really nice speed figures. So much credit to the product that Turfway has been turning out this past meet. Finally, just in a little bit of jockey news, obviously, circling back to Gulfstream Park and ending where we started, huge Saturday for Jose and Irad Ortiz Jr. I mean, they just absolutely cleaned up on Saturday, just absolutely cleaned up, put on a clinic on the turf, on the dirt, different types of running styles, different types of trips. Those two just came out to play on Saturday, and they were getting bet down hard. It was a very chalky day at Gulfstream Park. If you were looking for a big price, you really had to hit like Clapton and Affirmative Lady were kind of the two really big prices. And if you didn't hit those two, yikes, it was going to be a really chalky day. So, we were able to turn a little bit of a profit on some races by just really leveraging chalk and going, maybe, an exacta trifecta sort of situation, but it was a very chalky day. Favorites did very, very well at Gulfstream Park. And not surprisingly, Rad and Jose are up on a lot of those favorites. So congrats to them on a big day on Saturday. Well, that's going to do it for this episode of the Win Play Show. Like I said, make sure to subscribe to Trust the Profits. Make sure to follow me on Twitter at the handle at Fail to Menace. Well, again, thank you so much to everybody who came out to say hi. It was a real pleasure meeting everyone. Really enjoyed it. Loved it. Hope to be out to a few more tracks this season and meet some more of you good folks that are out there. And we cannot say how much we appreciate you tuning in every single week to what we do here on Trust the Profits. Until next time, friends, my name is Matthew DeSantis, wishing you a great and prosperous day at the races and reminding you that it's now post time.